For this artifact, I created a flash fiction entitled Nothing Left. My aim for this artifact was to look how the smallest of information can create a much larger story, and how we don't seem to use imagination while viewing and listening to pieces of work anymore. But before that, I'm going to focus on my actual research for this task. What is imagine or imagination? It's something that we all claim to know, but how much do we really understand it? Our imagination holds incredible powers. It allows us to visualize anything that our mind may perceive. And no one person's imagination is greater than another. Maybe they better understand how to use it, but it does not mean their imagination is better. Albert Einstein once said, "Imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world." This from a man renowned for his knowledge, understood that while knowledge is limited, imagination is limitless. That last part stuck with me. That imagination encircles the world. And this is something that I intended to look into. I wanted to see how the smallest of things can create stories. But before I was able to understand this point, I had to first better understand what imagination was. I read a story that the novelist Ernest Hemingway once bet his friends that he could create a story in 6 words. They claimed this to be impossible, but Hemingway simply replied, "For sale, baby shoes, never worn." These 6 words create a story with endless possibilities, and this fascinated me that something so little could create so much. We had touched on something similar to this in one of our lectures, where we were told to pick a word from 3 different columns and from that create a story. Before the trip to Tate Modern, I had read in a book, The Art of Social Theory, that art is often seen as an area imagination can be exercised much more freely than anywhere else in modern society. This was something I was thinking about while looking through the Tate Modern, and it's easy to understand how imagination is expressed more freely through pieces of art than anywhere else in the world. As I looked through the exhibits, there was one painting that stood out for me. This picture is just something I couldn't understand. I saw a box, I didn't see something imaginative, I didn't understand how it was art. But the person next to me said that he saw himself trapped within inside this box. It was at that moment that I realized art, like imagination, cannot be defined. It's like Pablo Picasso said, anything that you imagine is real. The next thing that I wanted to look at was unconventional ways of storytelling, as I felt like this was something I was going to use on my final artifact. This led me to find a short film called Postcards of Pridget that ended up being a big influence on my final project. This film isn't what you call conventional storytelling. There's no plot, characters, or story, in fact. There's only visuals of the city of Chernobyl. But I found myself imagining what it must have been like there, imagining the kids playing the Ferris wheel. We create our own stories from the littlest of information provided for us. In the same way that I could imagine the children playing, a storyteller could create a story from it. And this is what I realize my artifact should be about. The idea that our imagination allows us to take the littlest of information to create a wider story. I decided to use the 6 words that Hemingway had once used to win his bet: "For sale, baby shoes, never worn." And from this, I wanted to create the story to it. As I had already made 2 videos for my 2 previous artifacts, I thought this would be a chance to try something different. This is why I decided to pick a flash fiction. Given that I had never created a flash fiction before, I knew that I had to research them to better understand what they were. This led me to find a journal called A Crash Course in Flash Fiction. From here, I found out that they are usually between 300 to 1,000 words, and that the language used is very to the point due to the limited words. This also affects very many elements in the story, with a lot being left to our own imagination and how we interpret the details. By thoroughly researching imagination as both a story point and an idea, along with better understanding what a flash fiction was, I've given my work some integrity, as it's now not what I think or what I say. I have research to back up the points that I've been trying to make. I don't believe that one source has been the most useful for me. I believe that everything that I've looked at has helped to continuously develop my understanding of my subject matter. I've always been a bit skeptical of research and how useful it actually is on any subject matter that we create in media. But it was from my research that my idea came to light. Because of it, I found Hemingway's idea of the six-word story. This led me to think more about unconventional storytelling, something that I had never really thought about. Because of this, I looked into pieces of work that had stories without having a story, such as John Lennon's Imagine or Postcards from Pritchett. Both of them have narratives in them without having what you class as a conventional story. Through the words of the song and the visuals of the film, we interpret our own stories from them. And this led me to flash fictions. The idea that we could have something smaller than what you class as a regular story, but contain information larger than what is seen. While on their own, each little piece of information that I found through my research may seem useless, but it's like creating a puzzle. It's only once you start to put it together that every little piece has a place. And once you complete a puzzle, you then have your picture or your full understanding of your subject matter. In the same way that a missing piece of a puzzle creates an incomplete picture, a missing piece of research will never allow you to fully understand your subject matter. I used all this research in my final artifact. I took the six words that Hemingway had said to be my core aspect of my story. I use the idea that you can give the littlest of information and trust the audience to interpret it in their own way. I use it to structure my flash fiction properly and to understand that you don't need to have the 5 key points of a story. Nowhere do I have an antagonist. I don't even mention a woman or how the child is lost, because it's not necessary. For the information I give, you can create your own idea of what actually happened. But where does my work fit? This is something that I've been asked continuously throughout university. What is the interpretation of your piece of work? What is its meaning? Well, Susan Sontag said that interpretation is the revenge of the intellectual upon the world. She argues that interpretation is there in order to set up a shallow world of meaning. And if I've learned anything during this task, is that everything is how we define it. So who are we to say that she's wrong? For me, the main point of this module has always been research and development. And while creating the artifacts allowed us to express ourselves in unique ways, the research and development is what I've thought way more of in terms of this entire module. In terms of my F&P, I now understand how useful research can be in development of a story. And the amount of hours I had to put in for a 2 to 3 minute video on only certain topics, I now understand how much more time I'm going to need for my F&P. Oh, I bet you're wondering what the visuals of this presentation were. Well, just like my artifact 3 on my topic, I'll leave that to the imagination.